Neither one has responded yet. That was 11:38 I sent that. So I don't have a response from either of them yet.
Keith, we can't hear you.
Madam Clerk, we are broadcasting through YouTube, are we not, notwithstanding the fact we're using a different platform for the meeting?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. All right, so it looks like it's 2:01 p.m. We're scheduled to begin at 12 noon. This is the special meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Blaine County School District number 61, held the second day of October 2020. Madam Clerk, if you will please call the roll.
Trustee Larna?
Present.
Trustee Stone?
Present.
Trustee Turner?
Present.
And Trustee Rourke?
Present. The chair will declare that a quorum does exist. We have a very short agenda, even though it may not be such a short meeting. There is simply the one action item that is on that agenda, which is the approval of the proposed district and state competition plan. And I assume that, one, everybody got a copy or access to a copy of the agenda, and two, that everyone has received a copy of and has had an opportunity to read the proposed competition plan. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. With that in mind, Mr. Stilling, if you would, why don't you take us through what is proposed, what is contained in that proposal, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions just to make sure all trustees are on more or less the same page before we make a motion and have a full discussion. So if you'd like to go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm trying to think where to start with a 6-page document. I think the biggest thing that's different about this in comparison to where we've previously been is it would allow our school in red or schools we compete against that happen to be in a county that's red to allow for competition. There's a lot of considerations that have gone into that, and while I understand this, using Dr. Batch's terms, it's far more a plan geared towards mitigation than suppression. I'm not gonna, I can't hide that fact. I think we've tried to think about everything we can as far as making the safest plan possible within reason. I know there's a couple emails this morning, one from Mr. Doby. I've had some other questions from a couple of the principals who have coaches in question. I'm prepared to answer those and address those. I do almost think that answering up to your questions about the plan might be a better way to proceed, or if there's specific parts of the plan you'd like me to address.
Yes, let me just...
I'm not sure where to start, Mr. Rourke.
let me ask this if I could. If you could maybe outline what is contained in the proposed plan that was not contained in or is different from what we approved in terms of the sports protocol earlier this year.
Yeah, I think some of the highlights, the biggest one, of course, is allowing us to play teams that are in red if we're in red. That'd probably be the biggest change. Still, I think one thing I've made clear to my coaches, and I believe Lee J has with his, if there's, an outbreak within one of our teams, or the opponent we're playing, that obviously would trump this plan for sure. So that hasn't changed. The school quarantine for the individuals, if we're above our threshold and the opponent is above the threshold we previously approved, so that athletes would have a 14-day. I guess too, I caution us to use the word quarantine. That assumes they've been in contact with someone who tested positive, but an isolation from school, I guess, is probably a better way of putting it. That school isolation is new. I know the conversations have happened here at Wood River High School. I talked to Mr. Peck again this morning about conversations with those staffs and what that would look like for the teachers and the students. And no doubt there's a bigger burden on those kids and on those teachers. We had a healthy conversation at Wood River High School on Wednesday about what we could do as coaches and athletic directors to help mitigate that burden on those teachers. Things we talked about also were the KA95 masks for the coaches when they're at practice, when they're at the bus, anytime they're on school property, that the bandana or the gaiters we provide to our athletes, those wouldn't suffice. They'd have the KA95 masks. I do have more than an adequate supply of those. I checked again with the source of those again this morning. No, there wouldn't be any meals happening on buses. Buses now are supposed to be, and in most cases have been, a mask mandatory place. That would continue, and I've gone so far to, if a mask comes off a kid, the bus pulls over, and masks don't come off on the bus. Things like that. Arrangement of meals and how we can provide that. Things in the past, historically, we stay overnight. We go to state tournaments. They eat out at restaurants. They have food carried in. My soccer programs here, where if they qualified for state, would go to Idaho Falls. They would be commuting teams, not overnight teams. And while hotels can be seen as a clean environment, sleeping in your own bed and not spending any more time than we have to at in an environment, I think is better. The dedication of a sub during this quarantine or isolation time for athletes to have a conduit to the technology information they need. I did outline the cost of that in there, and a lot of the money we'd save by not having our team stay overnight, so it wouldn't be a huge financial burden. Talked to Brian Fletcher about that as well. The coaches, I think right now, when kids get to practice, they have logs, they keep symptom checks. If we played on a Friday, there'd still be an expectation that the coaches reach out to every single individual on Saturdays and Sundays, make sure we're even more thorough than we are now. With our symptom checks, with the issue that, surfaced yesterday at the high school, I think we had a pretty quick response and a very fluid move, like through the contact tracing with the athletic team here yesterday. I felt really comfortable with that plan. What else? Social emotional piece. I know that some athletes will opt out, and that's a family choice, and that my coaches, they know this is pending board approval, but we've talked at length about that there'll be a conversation that's going to happen, and that the roster for this year compared to this year, if there's a kid this year that is a high quality player on your team and a key contributor and coming back next year as a senior, and it's foreseen at all that kid's bullied or harassed, or it's foreseen at all that maybe playing time is limited because of a choice they made, that's going to be investigated thoroughly. I think that social emotional piece is huge, because we do know that there are times in a high school environment where a kid is treated differently for choices they make. What else? I will say there are some differences between Wood River Middle School and Alturas Elementary on their views exactly of what should happen with a coach that travels with a team. And I think that's largely, in my opinion, it's based on who those teachers are and the individuals they deal with, and how hard they might be to replace as a sub versus another teacher. I'm prepared to answer some questions on that. We've dealt with that. Talked to the I Have a Dream Foundation quite a bit, and Laura Rose Lewis. They're willing and ready to offer additional support for our student athletes. The space is an additional resource that's a little more, it can be cost prohibitive. It just depends on the situation. I know Lee J and I have had a lot of conversations with our conference opponents, because state, I traveled to Rexburg on Monday and did some lobbying and attended a meeting on Tuesday. The state IHSAA is finally ready to step in, putting a lot of, compared to where they're at now and where they were in March, putting a lot of restrictions on events and the things that happen in events and requirements there. That gave me a great, an increased level of comfort with the plan. And it does vary sport by sport. And I think that there are some sports that probably have better restrictions in place, I guess, than others do. What else do you want?
Let me ask you this, and I want to be careful about it so that we do not breach any confidences or policies of the board. But I understand Dr. Holmes informed us yesterday afternoon that the entire Wood River High School football team is now in quarantine. I'm going to use that word, along with all of the coaches, which include 3 teachers. Is that correct?
That's mostly correct. So I know that Aaron had talked to GC, and then I talked to GC last night, and I reconnected with Aaron, reconnected with GC. I would say the vast majority of our football team is in quarantine. The individuals who did not practice or participate in any kind of drills whatsoever leading up to the students' symptoms, those students are not in quarantine. Per my conversation with South Central Health, I did call, and normally Brooke Marshall would do this, but I called all the coaches with Brooke's permission and asked football drill practice, locker room etiquette, football specific questions to determine the level of close contact. And so we have 2 coaches out of the 9 that would not be allowed on school property now in quarantine, and the other 7 is deemed through contact tracing did not have any close contact with the individual. And student-wise, that number would be correct.
So that involves then how many students and how many teachers who are in quarantine?
Okay, so that would be 0 teachers. Only of our 9 coaches, 3 of them are certified teachers in the district. None of those 3 had any close contact with the individual. None of our classroom teachers had close contact, and there'd be 3 students outside the football team who were deemed to have close contact and are in quarantine.
So again, that would represent how many individuals?
I believe it's 5 students are not Wood River High School. 6 students are not Wood River High School students. It's in the low 40s, Mr. Rourke. It's 40-some. I don't have the exact number in front of me. I apologize.
That's fair. And Dr. Holmes, in addition, let's just say those 40, how many other students and teachers do we have in quarantine or some isolation of that sort?
Prior to this incident, we were probably, I'm guessing right now because I don't have the numbers in front of me, I'll have the updated one shortly, but we were probably around 54, 55, somewhere in there. They could be in quarantine or isolation due to a family member having, and so far all of our cases appear to have come from the outside. Of course, this latest incident is opportunity for it to spread on the inside.
So it's fair to say that we have approximately 100.
That's a good estimate.
Okay, very good. Well, let's go ahead here. Based on seniority, not age, I'd go first in those circumstances. Seniority, Trustee Stone?
It looks like Kevin has a statement. Kevin, you want to make your comment first?
Yeah, I think I do want to add that I think the contact tracing piece is important. It was very, like I said, very fluid and smooth. It was kind of hectic for a couple hours, but it was a fluid and smooth process in that a positive case on a team doesn't necessarily indicate that the entire team has to quarantine. That can vary sport by sport. And I think it could vary between a boys soccer team and a girls soccer team, depending how they practice. I know a school to the south of us recently had to quarantine a team, and they only had to quarantine 7 players out of 40. So I think it depends on how you practice, how you organize things, and the way you do things. Another thing too that I didn't add earlier is that, and I'm not sure if Lee J has talked to Coach Kirkland or not, but I think one of the things we've done, and it's not necessarily in line with the traditional essence of what a team means, but in the past we take every kid that we can take and fit in those hotel rooms we're allotted by the district, and looking to limit those rosters so that the kids who are maybe not going to see as much playing time as the other kids would not necessarily do these things. And that, a contact tracing in a volleyball team is going to be much different than when a football team, just because of the nature of the sport and the interaction. So, sorry, just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Stone.
Kevin, you mentioned in the plan something about a virtual swim meet. Can you give us a little bit of understanding how that works?
Yeah, so the swim meet, I can go through a couple of different sport by sport examples. So the high school swim meet, that is actually going to turn out now to probably be our lowest impact on additional online learning days. They will go, we had an athletic director all call this morning. Those athletes, and that's about 18 or 19 individuals, they'll go to Twin Falls on October 29th. They swim in every other lane. There are no spectators whatsoever, per my suggestion. Not everyone wants to do that. We're not as popular as people think we are here. It'll be a virtual, it'll be a live streamed. Kids are only in every other lane. There's a boys meet in the morning and girls in the afternoon, or vice versa. Those times will then be distributed to the state, collected, put into a computer. There will be no state meet in Boise. Every school in the state will swim every other lane. Those times put in the computer. They give out medals on those. So theoretically, for swimming, you're looking at an October 29th meet, and swimming is a lower risk sport on the NFHS guidelines, and so they'd have 2 weeks from that date, and that would be it for them. Cross country, there are spectators discouraged for a district race. That's at a golf course in Mountain Home. But to say there's no spectators, there's just not enough fences around that golf course to say no spectators. They'd have a state meet. 1 week later, that state meet is at Eagle Island State Park. There are 0 spectators. There are 6 separate races instead of 2 big races. Only that classification is allowed at a time. Again, no spectators, no medal ceremony or ribbon ceremony at the end. Those are mailed out later. So the huge congregation of kids at the end of the race, when really the aspirations and respiration particles are the highest, that won't occur at either swimming or cross country. Our soccer, the biggest worry for me was soccer. The Super Saturday that they did away with, but we have to this year due to limited officials. That's at Sunway Soccer Complex. I had control of organizing that event for there'd be 6 boys teams, 6 girls teams, 3 games that day at Sunway Soccer Complex. Laura's been there, knows what it looks like. Those games are spaced out at 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and 4 o'clock. There's only 4 spectators allowed per individual. So you're talking about 70 to 80 spectators for each team in an outdoor environment with space in between the fields. Volleyball, we had a plan where there would be potentially 4 schools in the same gym at the same time. After the athletic director meeting this morning, they are going to do back-to-back-to-back games rather than 2 games on the same court so people can space out. State volleyball is limiting spectators. Kimberly's gym is not what it used to be. It's a much larger gym. They are going to limit to 4 individuals per player. You talk only 2 teams at a time. They'll clear the gym in between games. So you're talking about 50 spectators per team at a time. State soccer, which is outdoor in Idaho Falls, they're limiting to 4 spectators for each participant as well. Long answer, Laura, sorry.
No, that's good. That's what I wanted to hear. So we're in red now based on the GHI metrics. Does that mean that practices for all our sports have stopped per our policy?
That's a very good question that I've been asked yesterday as well. And I think there's as much as Keith has complimented our plans as we've gone along, there is some grayness in there as we move from the fall practice model just to get our kids back on the field again and back into our competition model. So that has not meant thus far that we've stopped practices. It has meant that we can't even, like Carrie and Wood River, if we've been scheduled to play tonight, we wouldn't have played tonight, that we'd keep practices to within that team only. But there's no sport that we have that would be allowed to compete with another school right now. So it would be contained to that individual team.
Okay. And have you seen the South Central Public Health District, the dashboard that's posted on their website? Right. Because it's showing at 21 cases per 100,000 and 9.87% test positivity that we're in a high risk. And it actually says in there their recommendation is to discontinue youth and adult sports and activities in which physical distancing isn't possible. And it says to limit travel and visitors to the region, as well as limited travel within the state to areas of high rates of spread, which is most of the state right now. And that you have a 14-day quarantine when you get there before you're mingling with other people. It's a pretty big jump this week from where we've been.
Yeah, that is not lost on me with the timing of today's meeting by any means.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I think that got posted on yesterday.
Yeah, if I may, that risk assessment is Blaine County risk assessment. We are, the county commission adopted one that's based on the same metrics as the global health. And Dr. Terry O'Connor does that every Thursday. So there'll be a new one every Thursday. It's only because it was posted Thursday that we're orange instead of red.
Right, we would be in red otherwise, yeah.
That's correct.
I think one piece of that, I can't, elephant in the room, I can't ignore everything in that comment, Laura, but I think one thing Lee J and I talked about was that if we were to host a contest in red or to host a team, if we were to host a team and we were in red, that would be a no spectator whatsoever environment. If we were in orange and to host a team in red, we'd have to talk about that as far as what exactly that spectator would look like. But I think, I have one of the more vocal coaches in this meeting with us. I think that in a lot of the conversations that I've had with my coaches and my parents, we find a way to put the game on Facebook Live. It means no spectators. It means no spectators. And it's about the kids, and that's why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why we're here for sure.
And that, again, that only eliminates one piece of that, but it's a piece that Lee J and I and our committee has talked about.
I actually had wanted to start with a really big thank you to you. I know how hard you've been working and how hard you've worked with your coaches and the other athletic directors and Dr. Batcha and everybody. It's just, you've done just a fantastic job of trying to come up with the safest possible protocol for these kids. And your efforts to try and make this possible on their behalf are very commendable. So thank you for all that effort for them.
If I could, before we move on, has anybody calculated if we were using the metrics adopted by the South Central Public Health District rather than the Global Health Initiative, where would we be right now based upon our numbers?
Based on that 21.7 number, Mr. Rourke?
How about the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare number, the latest one, which is the 26.1?
And that would, go ahead, Mr. Stelling.
I think the trickiest thing, and John Coth is has been my COVID tracker, metric tracker. The biggest thing we noticed with Idaho Health and Welfare is there's been a couple times with that we referred to it as our COVID crystal ball, which has given us some more leeway in canceling games and keeping games on. Is that in the last several days, it's started to that crystal ball and predicting has started to fluctuate a lot more than it did like the first 7 to 10 days that we had access to this. So it's not been as accurate. But I have it open right now, Mr. Rourke. So give me 1 second.
While we're waiting for that, Dr. Holmes, do you have anything to add to that? Microphone. Mike.
There we go.
No, you're off again.
All right, now, I had gone over to South Central's website, and I'm working on one computer instead of two, so I'm really lost. to try to figure out where we would be. I believe we would be orange if we were still using the South Central Health metrics type of thing. The other thing maybe I can add to this conversation, because I know it was a confusion earlier, is while we are doing everything we can to reduce the spread, once you become in contact with somebody who is positive, even if you've been wearing a mask, if you've been less than 6 feet away for more than 15 minutes, that is a time when they say you need to quarantine. So most of our sports were able to keep the kids apart for most of the time. Unfortunately, in this situation with the Wood River High School football team, when you're practicing and tackling each other all the time, you're not staying away from each other. So that's why we are where we are with that team needing to quarantine.
Right.
I don't know that helps, but maybe that helps you understand the difference between the sports and how practice can run and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think you asked, the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare has us at 23.9 today, which is orange. That's Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, though. That's the October 1st number. No, never mind.
That's for all of Idaho, isn't it? Not just.
You're right. Yeah, I'm sorry, Laura. You're right. It didn't refresh. 26.1. 26.1 just into the red. Sorry, Laura. It didn't refresh on me.
Yeah.
All right. And Trustee Lorna, did you have a comment or a question?
I just had a question, I guess, in regards to, and it doesn't really matter, but generally during football, the kids aren't together for that amount of time in the same space. So I'm just confused, that they were together with longer than 15 minutes within 6 feet of each other, because usually they're moving. So I guess I just had a question on that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I've been asked that question by several parents via text, phone call, and email in the last 12 hours. So the deal with football is this, and when South Central first kind of gave me the direction to go with this, I did call that school to the south that I'm friends with the coach and asked how they went through it. And I guess this could be, depending on the approval or denial of his plan. Our football team goes through a lot of station work where they might be rotating from one coach to another, working on drill A, drill B, drill C. So the position group that they're in, if it's an offensive lineman, a defensive back, running back, the group that they're in is the higher level risk. But when you have county fair atmosphere, I'm not sure what Coach Kirkland thought, the stations, whatever you want to call it, some coach have their own cool name for it. But if they can't limit down and say those kids weren't blocking and tackling and working with each other across the line from them, the higher level of respiratory particles, the level of sweat and breathing and things that goes on, that's how I was given the direction from South Central Health. And actually, I shouldn't say one school. The two schools I talked about, that's the same process they went through. Now, in our situation, the only kids we could rule out were the kids who were not partaking in practice. And the one school I use as an example, they have never practiced together. This might be something for Lane to think about going forward the next few weeks here. Is they don't ever practice their varsity and JV together this year because of that reason. I'm not sure if that's doable with your setup, coach, but so they could limit out JV right away. They don't use the same locker room even right now. And then within that varsity team, they were able to talk about who had ever been in the same huddle and who had been in the same groups with that kid. And again, it's a lot of it's because of the nature of the sport and the drills that, no, in football, I think if we went down to Cary High School and saw a kid standing 6 feet from a coach 15 minutes, I think Coach Kirkland probably wouldn't have a coach on his staff very long. But it's the nature of the sport and the things that happen, not just the 15 and 6.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that. I was just curious on how that went down. So,
Trustee Stone, did you get all of your questions answered?
That's all I have for Kevin right now, but I did actually want to ask Dr. Batcha a question, and I see that he's joined us. Is that okay?
No, it's not okay. You got to wait until everybody else has had their opportunity. Go ahead, Trustee Lorna.
I don't have any at this point. Just thinking I'd like to add on to all the work that everyone has worked so hard together. I think that this is a really thought out plan, and I don't have any questions in regards to it. I have some citizens have come to me asking if they could help financially support the impact on the school district in regards to the bus drivers, the loss of, in regards to students having to quarantine prior. So if we were in the red and we did have to bring on a substitute or, that was a question. And so I think as that gets closer, we can figure out how to make that happen. They just want to make sure that they're supporting this financially, instead of the impact being on the school district. And I know in regards to, I guess one of my, not concerns, but from the email, in regards to bus drivers, I think it will have to depend on how we, like whether parents are allowed or not, but if they are, if that's something that we're able to do is bring our own students instead of using the bus transportation system. Kevin?
So, yeah, one of the things that I talked to, I did see Lance's email. It's something I thought about a little bit ahead of time. So per our district rules, a parent can drive their own individual to a contest or home from a contest. There is a means within our school district policy where a parent could transport another student. That's a waiver that they sign. They go into Skyward, sign up that person as an emergency contact, print off a form of that. It has, I think Laura's used it actually, I believe, sometime. But they add that student as emergency, or that parent of the other student as emergency contact. So they could drive more than one. Obviously, in this situation, that's not ideal. I mean, we're trying to, but by the same token, if they've been on the same field with that kid for a week of practice and at a game, it's not as large a concern. I do know that Cary High School has 2 minibuses at their disposal. Wood River High School would have 4 for probably for state competition when you leave earlier in the day. 3 of our minibuses up here at the bus barn are used at lunchtime. So for an all-day competition, we'd only have 4 available. For a later in the day competition or left after the lunch hour, we'd have 6 or 7 at our disposal here.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't have any other questions. No, I think this is a really, so much time has been put into this plan. So thank you, everyone that's been involved in this.
Trustee Turner.
Yeah, again, thank you for adding some more meat to the bones here from the first proposal we were looking at the last meeting. I've got a number of issues that I need to kind of get my hands around. One is this concept of quarantine. The Panther bubble, or for lack of a better term. What does this look like? I mean, what does this functionally look like? Kids at home, isolated from the rest of their family members? Are they kids that are just held out of school and are still mixing socially with the rest of the community? What and who enforces this? What's the teeth in this? I know in other sporting environments, if someone breaks quarantine, they're out. They're out of the they're out of the competition. Who would again enforce this? Say if your star wide receiver happened to break quarantine, what are the teeth behind this whole thing? Because it seems to me that if this has any chance of working, it needs to be strictly enforced. So maybe Coach Kirkland could enlighten me on some of these things.
Sure, I'll address that. I don't, and I appreciate all the comments that have been made today. I don't see it to be a whole lot different than any one of us going to Twin Falls to shop or going into Albertsons to participate in shopping there, picking up a med. All we think we can do, I believe, is control that student has been put in quarantine and they're at home. I don't think we can dictate another's lifestyle beyond that particular point after having done all we possibly could to follow the rule that we put forth to you guys, which is quarantine.
But again, what does that mean? So the kid doesn't go to Twin Falls, or the kid stays at home, or does the kid have free access to play in the park on days when he's not? Does he practice while he's in the quarantine?
Well, I imagine he would. He'd probably be training in the backyard. I know my son would be on his own. Once again, I don't believe we can dictate what a person does in quarantine. We can only ask them to do up to what we've said, and that's not participate in the school activities in person, but let alone do his work at home and be followed up from the coach and other players and staff.
So do you believe playing teams that are in a red zone in an area of defined community spread increases the chances of community spread within our community, or is this a de minimis concern of yours?
You know, once again, Trustee Turner, I see hundreds of cars coming into our valley and hundreds of our cars leaving the valley each day to participate in shopping in different areas throughout the state of Idaho. Our students are in those cars. We're in those cars. When's the last time you went to Twin? When's the last time you ate out? You know, I don't know if we could control that. If someone was out at the blinking light asking folks from 2T, please not come into our county, you're red. I know, those are our service people, and we're helping them as well. So, you know, I don't know exactly what kind of answer you're looking for, but we can only control what we can control, and that's ourselves and what we ask kids to do as well as our own selves. And I think we're doing the very best that we can.
Mr. Stille, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, and I respect Coach Kirkland's opinion. I think that you know, I think there'd have to be strict guidance. One of the things in the plans that is different than before is I know at the beginning of every sports season we do have a parent-player meeting. I think there'd be I've only started putting this together because I'm not going to prepare a 2-hour parent-player meeting without the necessity for it. But one of the pieces is to get information from Aaron Bronson, and I'd like to call it isolation, not quarantine. Quarantine indicates that they've been in contact with somebody who's tested positive or confirmed positive. But the isolation, Dan, I'm not trying to mince words here, but you know, for me, and I think a lot of our coaches or a lot of our athletes are going to do what their coaches tell them to do. We can't control whether they go to Twin or whether they go over to Susie's house because they're going steady. I use old terminology there, but I think, you know, for me personally, and Coach Kirkland, you can agree or disagree. If the approval or denial of this plan meant that there was a consequence in place, and let's call it a code of conduct violation like we have for drugs or alcohol or bullying, harassing, if the teeth of that behind this plan getting approved or denied is necessary, I'm fully ready to enforce that. That if we find out that a kid is breaking the isolation with other students, that we investigate it and have a plan in place. If that's what it takes, I'm willing to do that. And I know it's not a guarantee, Mr. Turner, you're right. And I don't know, Coach, if you want to speak to that or not. I mean, if that's what it takes, and we have somebody sends me a Snapchat of some kid at a party with 40 other kids and they're a member of the soccer team, then you're done. You're off. You're still in quarantine. You're done playing state soccer, bud, and that's it.
Go ahead, Coach Kirkland. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a few further comments with Kevin there. Our kids do listen to us, and in our system here in Cary, our seniors are our leaders, and they're assigned 4 athletes on the team, and they follow up with them regularly in text messages. That's how we keep our communication going on. Those seniors are also following up with those athletes with their grades and responsible to those guys as a father figure in our school. And that's what drives a lot of the things that we do, and why we have the success that we do is because our seniors are getting it done with the underclassmen. So we hand it down to them, and I can expect the same responsibilities if the kid was put in quarantine or isolation.
Thank you for that. Let's finish with Dan's questions if we could, and then I'll get back to the other two. Go ahead, Dan. Are you done, or do you have other questions?
No, I'm again concerned on the academic front. Possibly if hopefully the team has a great run through the playoffs, and but are we looking at how long are we looking at being out of school? 6 weeks? I mean, what if we were to quarantine fully through a run to the state championship? How long a time would we be isolating these kids?
Do you want to field that one, Mr. Stilling?
So Can I go in to present? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Mr. Stilling, do you want to address Trustee Turner's question?
Oh, there he goes.
Can you see my screen here?
Yes.
So that, I mean, this is the longest one. It's football, and all those dates for the various sports. I did not get a chance to address a couple of these now that I know some nuances that have changed from our conference meetings today. Yeah, the Cary football is indeed the longest one, provided they come across a team that's above that 15.0 threshold. It's October 30th, that first playing game. Probably at Cary, and some of that might depend, correct me if I'm wrong, Coach Kirkland, on where they get seeded in the district and whether or not they're able to play a couple of the games towards the end of the season based on opponent threshold. But yeah, you're talking October 30th, the first day back, and Coach Mr. Cook, Lee J. Cook put these in there, and then 12-1 be the first day back, Mr. Turner.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just an extra point for that, Kevin. There's a huge possibility that we will host these first 3 games here in Cary to control the crowd and the system that occurs here. So just a thought there. Stupid phone for right. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I certainly appreciate those numbers. Time out of school for any kids is a big issue, and it looks like there's been some thought placed in how to support these kids. Again, we've got our teachers working under an incredibly stressful modality now with kids in class and kids out of class. And if we throw a third layer of full online kids into that mix, I'm worried about the stresses on the teachers. I know I've obviously received the same correspondence that everybody else has, unanimous support amongst the teachers in Cary. I don't know if that's a fair representation of what's going on down there, but certainly we received that. But again, a lot of things that come before me as a trustee and as a new trustee are things that I don't know a lot about, and I have to do a lot of research about, and I have to understand kind of what we're talking about. But on Tuesday, I had an incredible experience of being at a presentation where we awarded a teacher at the middle school the Teacher of the Year award for the state of Idaho. And I can't tell you how moved I was by that, because right there it showed me the why. I mean, I don't always understand the what, but I do understand the why. And the why is getting the kids in this district in front of these great teachers that we have. And I struggle with anything that changes the priorities that is not putting kids in front of teachers. So that's just kind of my overview on that. But again, that's all I have to say for now.
All right, let me go back. I think Trustee Lorna, you had a question.
Yeah, I didn't have a question. It was more so just kind of towards the comment of Lane going to Twin. And I know, when he was talking about all of these families going to Twin, and Trustee Stone was kind of shaking his head saying, no, I haven't gone to Twin since then. I think it's really important to remember what Cary looks like versus the rest of the valley. We don't have a grocery store here. We have an itty bitty grocery store that provides milk and eggs, but we do not have any other options but to go to Twin Falls or to go, we don't have a Ace Hardware. We don't have an Elo Greens. We don't have anything here. So we do leave. And in fact, that's where I'm going after this meeting, is to Twin Falls to get my groceries, because it's one or the other. It's, and so I do think that that's something that we need to consider and keep in the back of our minds, where we are all Blaine County, but we do look a little bit different here, when we're saying our families are going to Twin. That's, it's so different, because that's oftentimes on a Saturday when parents, because generally parents are in the Wood River Valley Monday through Friday working, from 7 to 6, and they get home. And then Saturdays is kind of our only day that we can go get groceries. So they pile all their kids in their car and head to Twin. And, hit the hardware stores and the grocery stores and the whatever stores. And so I just want to keep that in mind, that we don't there are quite a few families, not as many as there used to be when this was more an agricultural community and more farmers. But, there are a lot of families with wives that still stay home and that never, ever go to Haley, like at all. Their banks are in Twin, and so I do think it's important just to keep in mind that we are a little bit different here, in regards to how often we are leaving Blaine County. So that's all. I just want to go ahead, Laura.
Thank you for pointing that out. I don't think I had really gotten that, and that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. So, and then also just on that note, really quickly, how many people from Twin Falls County and Lincoln County do work up here? They drive up every single day. I know that I can count of right now 8 people that live in Richfield and work in Haley. And so I just think that that's really important as well. Like the cross contamination, that's probably not the right word, but within all of our counties, we are very linked, in Twin Falls, same thing. How many people from Twin Falls work in Ketchum, and I can't imagine that drive every day, but there's plenty of them. So I just think it's important that we keep that in mind as we're trying to navigate this.
Yes, go ahead, Trustee Stone.
I think what is interesting to me about those arguments that there are people going to Twin, there are people from Twin coming up here, there's only so much that we can control. And those arguments to me are exactly why we should be controlling the things that we can to help increase the safety of our own staff and students. The fact that we have these other risks that we can't control makes it all the more important that the things that we can control that we do. And I have concerns about, up until this point, we had lots of emails from people, especially in Cary, but not just in Cary, and a lot of comments from Trustee Larna that kids in Cary aren't wearing masks and they're not social distancing and they're all hanging out together. And it seems to be a different culture there, and that culture concerns me. And when we have on the front page of the paper a picture of a coach with his mask pulled down talking to players that are just a foot away from him, unfortunately it re-emphasizes my concerns about whether policies like this will be followed, especially if there isn't some kind of enforcement.
I don't want to cut anybody off, but what I would like to do is have all of the questions asked and answered, and then we'll get a motion on the table and get it seconded, and we can have the discussion.
May I interrupt for just a moment? I'm afraid Dr. Batch is going to have to go back to seeing patients. If he has anything to add, I think we probably ought to ask him at this time, Mr. If you're okay with that.
Go ahead, Dr. Batcher, with whatever general comments you may have, and then if the trustees so desire, we can ask additional questions.
Thanks. I appreciate you guys having me here. I also have Dr. Hatzenbuehler in the room with me as well. So I guess a few comments that I would make. If we look at our numbers for the last week, we had 35 confirmed positive cases between September 20th and September 27th in the Valley. That's the most cases that we've had in a week since April, when we were coming on the downside of this initial surge that we had in the spring. Those are incredibly concerning numbers. The last couple numbers I have of St. Luke's data is 2 and 1 positives on the 28th and the 29th, and obviously there's some turnaround time, so I don't have the most up-to-date numbers. We also had a meeting of the the Adaptive Planning Committee yesterday in conjunction with South Central Public Health Districts, and it did raise our county risk level up to high. We're at 21.7 new cases per 100,000 with a 9.87% positivity rate. These are incredibly disturbing numbers. What I will tell you is, according to the recommendations that would be in place for strategies, and I will quote, discontinuation of youth and adult sports and activities in which physical distancing is not possible. So those are things that are a big concern to us. Obviously, we all know about the football player at Wood River being tested positive, and the quarantining of the football players there, which I think does factor. I'm going to respond to Coach Kirkland's comment about leadership. I agree that leadership is an incredibly important concept, particularly where team sports are concerned. And not only do the underclassmen get leadership from the seniors, but the seniors probably get leadership from the coaches. And when I see behaviors like I saw at the game on Friday night with coaches not wearing masks, it concerns me as to how seriously the coaches are taking this and what messages they are giving to their student athletes. I think modeling is the best way for us to ensure that the proper safety precautions are coming on are being taken, because this is not just a thing that affects the Cary football team. It affects the Cary football team. It affects the teachers. It affects people in the community. It affects people that are here in our community, and so on and so forth. And so we should be setting examples for our students. And I think that if we can't be ensured that leadership is taking a proper stance with this, I think that it makes any further loosening of conditions as far as sports being played very problematic from my standpoint.
Any questions of Dr. Batcha? Go ahead, Trustee Stone.
I have one. Dr. Batcha, there's a lot of talk about the fact that lots of people who get COVID don't end up in the hospital or don't end up dying. But I have a close friend who's about 10 weeks out from having it and who's still having really bad days. He's young and he didn't get very sick at the time and doesn't have any comorbidities, but is now having to do antibiotics, check chest x-rays, things like that. So I know that this kind of long hauler problem is something that we're hearing more about and learning more about now. Can you just talk to that a little bit? Because I think there's a perception that since most people don't die, it's not dangerous. And I think it's more complicated than that.
Well, I would say that certainly I have patients who are long haulers, patients who are not elderly, who have been active and are now significantly impaired. I don't know if Dr. Hatzmuller has similar experiences.
Yes, similar, including my wife.
Okay, and so yeah, I think that there is some certain concerns with that. I'd also talk about the incidence in young people of myocarditis. So there was a study that was done in the Ohio State University that took athletes who had tested positive. There were about 26 athletes in the study that had tested positive through routine screening. Most of those, at least half of them, had mild symptoms and the other half had no symptoms whatsoever. Of those athletes, they did a cardiac MRI scan on those patients and those students, and 4 of them, so 15% of them had cardiac MRI evidence of myocarditis. Myocarditis can be fatal. We do see it particularly in athletes that structural changes in the heart can lead to things like arrhythmias, et cetera. So, it's not, there are very real risks even to young, healthy people. And so I do think that we need to be considering that when we're making our decisions about what we're doing and how we're acting.
I think I think sometimes there's a sense that we all have to just all get it and get over it or kind of move on, from having it. But so thank you for talking about that. I think that's helpful.
If I could just add one question to that, and this seems to change from time to time, like so much that we think we know about this virus, but there seems to be some evidence that people who contract the virus and recover, whether they were symptomatic or not, can later become reinfected, which of course punches a pretty big hole in the herd immunity theory. Dr. Batchy, what have you read or what do you know about that?
So to date, there are 2 case studies of individuals who have been infected with the coronavirus who've subsequently become reinfected with the coronavirus. So we do know that happens for sure. If we look at the other coronaviruses that there are, so there are 7 coronaviruses that cause human illness, 4 of which cause an illness that is basically the common cold. What we know about antibody response to those, as well as the more serious previous coronaviruses like SARS and MERS, is that the immune response to the disease is fleeting. And if we look at studies that were done on SARS and MERS, that typically the antibody response wanes between 6 months and 18 months in general. This is why you can get the cold over and over again, all right? Because the immune response doesn't last. So if we think about 6 months from 6 months ago, that was the beginning of the pandemic. That was March, okay? So there's a distinct possibility that there are individuals now who were sick in March who may be susceptible to the virus again. This is our hope with getting an immunization, is that we can get enough people immunized that the herd immunity can take effect. But what's most likely going to happen is that we're probably going to need an immunization every year, just like you need a flu shot every year. And so that's one of the things that we're probably going to have to do. Now, the other thing that I'm going to say is it's very unlikely that there's going to be an immunization available to the general populace for quite some period of time. So I got to agree with you, Chairman Rourke, that the idea of developing herd immunity is not a good strategy for this pandemic at this point in time, in the absence of a vaccination.
Good. Trustee Turner, did you have a question of Dr. Batcha?
Yes, I did. The one thing we haven't touched on so far is testing. And boy, great news that the state's been allocated 35,000 test kits to test teachers and students. But and to me, if there was a robust, rapid antigen turnaround test time, the whole math of this thing would change for me dramatically. If we had the ability to test students, student athletes, and teachers and coaches, and understand who has been infected and who needs to quarantine, it changes everything. So Dr. Batchy, where do you think we are in that process of having a rapid response, cheap antigen test available in our community that could potentially be used to screen students and student athletes?
So what I will tell you, at least from the St. Luke's system standpoint, is just on a conversation yesterday, is that they're looking at getting some of those rapid tests up here in the next couple weeks. Now, what I will tell you is that unfortunately we don't have them in quantity sufficient to do asymptomatic testing, which is really what the hallmark of all this is going to be, right? When we can test people who are asymptomatic, so that before they get on the bus for the football game, yeah, you're good, you get on the bus. That's going to be some ways out, regardless of what happens, just because of supply chains. They're going to need to manufacture enough of these tests and to distribute them, et cetera, et cetera. I think that an incredibly optimistic estimate for a widespread availability of the antigen tests for symptomatic patients here in the Wood River is probably going to be December. And then whether we can get enough kits to consider asymptomatic testing, I just can't even speculate on that.
All right.
Thank you. Any other questions of Dr. Batcha? All right, Doctor, thanks once again for you being here. We very much appreciate it. Go ahead, Coach Kirkland. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, if I could defend my coach for just a second. When do we get a fresh breath there from our duties on the sideline? We're huffing it just as much as our athletes are. We're not perfect. Do the dang best that we possibly can. I know a petition was sent to the board that has 400 signatures on it from the town of Cary, interested in our students, our kids, our grandkids going forward into the playoffs. 80 signatures from the students themselves have been sent as well forward to you guys. All we're asking is for an opportunity for our students to participate in the game that they love with the precautions that we can set forth, and we think they're darn good, and we'll adhere to them. We're not perfect. Thank you.
Nor are we by any means. Mr. Silling, I have a question. If everyone else is essentially done, we did adopt the athletic competition protocol earlier this year. And I think it's fair to say that what is being proposed here would modify or amend that protocol. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, sir.
Then let me ask you this, and I don't mean to be rhetorical about it or criticize anyone for making this proposal, but what has changed since we passed the original protocol that would make what is being proposed a reasonable progression, if you will? And I'm not expressing yet any kind of an opinion or decision, but from what I can see, and God knows I'm no epidemiologist, things have taken a turn for the worse. And the numbers from this past week are not good. On top of that, you do have this unfortunate incident with the Wood River High School football team. So what has changed in such a way that we would be compelled to, I'm going to call it loosen, if you will, loosen the restrictions that were contained in the protocol originally approved?
No, and I've used that word loosen a lot too, Keith, so I get where you're coming from. I think the biggest thing that's changed is that, if you look at the first couple paragraphs of every protocol I sent to you, we talk about keeping our students and staff as safe as possible. That desire hasn't changed. I know that how much work and how much has gone into getting our kids back to school. I know how much input you guys receive from the community, from teachers, from administrators, and we have gotten our students back to school. I think the biggest thing for me that's changed, the number of students impacted by the district and state protocol is certainly a lower number of students that would have been impacted if we had this plan from the onset from August 10th. You'd be talking about, without guessing, 200 here, 75 at Cary, another 100 at the middle school. You talk about 400 to 450 kids that probably still would have been on isolation, not quarantine. Isolation if this plan was there from the onset. And I think that would be a daunting task for our teachers and staff. I think the impact on our teachers and our students is certainly less than it would have been if we had this plan in place on August 10th. I think having had time the last couple months to see exactly what the district tournaments are going to look like and some of the protocols that are in place at most locations, those have certainly changed. You've given me some confidence that at least the environment our athletes are going into and potentially spectators, I have a lot of faith in that. going to Rexburg and lobbying and sitting through his IHSA meetings and knowing that the state is actually taking some measures to keep athletes and spectators and coaches safe. That wasn't there in August. It was all local control, and thanks to my good friend Ted Reynolds, who was at Twin and now at Ridgeview, he was fist pounding on the table mode on Monday, Tuesday morning's meeting, and just demanding and asking the state step in and put some more restrictions in place. Those are the biggest things that have changed. I'm not going to deny what Batch and Hatson say. We're not like the NBA bubble. We're not like the Pac-12 SEC money where we can test kids every day. It's a mitigation plan, not a suppression plan. I think we have a more detailed and safer plan than anybody else in Idaho does right now, from what I've seen. I don't want to just be I think Coach Kirkland says about the football team, you don't want to be this much better than the next. You want to be that much better than the next best team or next best opponent you have. I think we have a plan that allows for that. I'm not going to argue the fact that it's mitigation, it's not suppression, and there are risks assumed that a family and a student athlete have to take on in order to go under this plan. I think that I know Dan mentioned the teeth to the protocol, and I'm sorry, Coach. Dr. Batch's observations at the game on Friday was a lot of passionate kids playing football and fans that love to see their kids play, and that part's there. And we did have coaches without masks. When I said hi to Dr. Batch, I had to walk down the sideline and tell our athletes without helmets to put their masks back on because they weren't even participating. And I think one of the things that would need to be present that's not addressed in my plan is the teeth. What are we going to do if we have a coach without a mask? What are we going to do if we have, if we get, I think I use Instagram because that seems to be how I get a lot of kids turned in for code of conduct violations. If we have a picture of a kid not following the protocol, I think Mr. Turner is right. I think there has to be some teeth to that. And if we're asking you guys to make this exception and loosen things that, what's number one's name? The Smith kid, the quarterback. I mean, that we'd have to be prepared as athletic directors and coaches that I went to the grocery store to get bread for my family. Okay, that's understood. Why are you at this party with 40 people? That's another situation that we have to deal with. And as coaches and ADs, we'd have to be prepared to deal with that situation. If we're going to make this loosening of the threshold, Coach, and I think the same would be true for coaches. That if you guys are through this, I think that Lee J and I would need to sit down and possibly with Mr. Pack and Mr. Pierce and maybe GC when her grandkids are on her lap, but to talk about what the teeth would be if we're gonna do this, that there has to be some teeth behind it.
Let me ask this, and I'm sure that there are lots of parents of student athletes who are watching, and I don't want to increase the blood pressure of one group over another. But as I look at this, in order for the volleyball team and the soccer teams to compete in the first district, I guess, playoffs and then perhaps state, we would have to agree this afternoon to adopt these changes, correct?
That's not entirely accurate. So I had one preliminary meeting with our athletic directors at our conference this morning. Soccer is our most pressing need. I'm sorry, the bracket's up on the window here. That would be next
Thursday, isn't it?
Next Thursday. Volleyball, sorry, different window. Volleyball would not start until the 15th. I kind of told our athletic directors that I would probably have an answer. I also knew there'd be a lot of debate and a lot of discussion today, so I didn't give them that I have a definite answer at the end of this meeting. But next Thursday, soccer is the most pressing need. I think something I'll add to, and I don't mean to make this meeting longer than it needs to be. Several of my coaches, and I anticipated a possible difference amongst principals and both their belief systems and their sub-availability and valuability of every teacher's valuable. That's why we're here. Every coach is valuable, but there are different ways that people are invaluable, I would say. But I have a boys soccer team that is prepared to use both of their non-teaching coaches if they have to, because and it's not something that Coach Monharas would be looking forward to, or Coach Salamanca, but their assistant coach, who's not a teacher, has volunteered to take that team and do that. If the teachers come back in the classroom is that high an impact. So there are things that we can do to mitigate that coach in the classroom and in some of our situations. And it's different in some buildings than others. Sorry, long answer, Keith.
Well, I'm just trying to line things up in terms of when decisions might be made or would have to be made, and that obviously entails some implications that certain teams would not be able to compete and others would. But from what I understand, Coach Kirkland would not be involved in, he and his team, the Panthers, would not be involved in playoff activity until late October. Is that correct? Or early November? So we would not necessarily, a decision this afternoon that was adverse to a change in policy at this point would not necessarily foreclose later activity by other athletic teams, just depending upon when their tournaments are scheduled. Is that also correct?
Yeah, that's accurate. And I think too, and I did talk to Mr. Koth about this morning and the other ADs. I think there are still soccer competitions on Tuesday that can have a bearing on seed for the tournament that starts Thursday. I think, having an answer by Tuesday as far as soccer goes would be probably the latest we could go with that particular decision.
Yes, Trustee Stone.
And if we decided to do that, I think we should address the fact that if we have a policy right now that says that they aren't supposed to be practicing under these circumstances. So if we just waive that until then, I'm not sure how we deal with that.
As of today, they should not be practicing.
I'm not making suggestions. I'm simply asking questions at this point. Are there any other questions of Coach Kirkland or Athletic Director Stilling? And Dr. Holmes, did you want to weigh in here?
I was going to say, under the current practice protocols that you guys have approved as of today, when we became red with Harvard Global Health Institute, they should not be practicing.
All right. Any more questions from the trustees? Okay, then.
One thing, and this is not an intentional maneuver, but when we talked about this as a committee, our impression was that when we went from the practice model to the competition model, that we could still do things with our own team. And if I have unintentionally misled this board, that was not the intention of our committee by any means.
Sure. I understand. All right. If there are no further questions, then I will entertain a motion to approve these recommendations or approve this proposed competition plan. And then if it is seconded, we will have matter on the floor, which we can then discuss. So if someone would like to make the motion to approve.
I'll make the motion to approve the Fall Athletics District and State Competitions and Travel Plan as written.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? Seconding a motion does not necessarily mean by any stretch of the imagination you have to vote in favor, but I think it would be wise for everyone concerned here if we did have a discussion. It's up to you, and a chair should not second a motion. So I'm not twisting anybody's arm and saying you have to second the motion.
I'll second it.
Okay. Good. Now I can stop talking. All right. It has been moved and seconded. The motion is on the floor to approve the district and state competition plan that has been presented to us this week. And I think I would like to start the discussion off, if I could, with comments from you, Trustee Larna.
Yeah, so I think that it's something really that we all need to consider. I know currently right now we're in the red, but we have not been. And I know right now there's an uptick, which we all were expecting, especially from Labor Day. But we've been doing such an incredible job until right now. And in regards to the county being in red, that doesn't mean that the schools are in red. And that's also something that we've talked about, reconsidering, even opening up schools. And, we were talking about Cary opening up in Plan A. I think that's something that we need to consider as we move through this, and not having a hard and fast no. And maybe as Chairman Rourke was saying that, if we need to look at soccer first and then volleyball or whatever, and continue to meet per week to discuss these plans as we move forward. But I think a hard and fast no is not fair to these students who have been through everything. They're not the ones impacted, but they are the ones being impacted by the disease. They're not being able to go to school full time. They're not able to play sports. They're not able to do all of these things. And while we are trying to control what's going on right now, and I don't want to say I was offended by our culture in Cary. I know that it's a little bit different than what everyone else's culture looks like, but that doesn't mean that we're not willing to take things seriously. And it's not just Cary, it's all of Blaine County. And I'm sure that these parents and students are going to do what they need to do to get to where they've been at, as I think it was Kirk Lane had talked about. These students have been preparing for this, since in Cary, 5th grade is how long our kids started playing football. We don't have any other options here. And again, I don't want to make this just about Cary. This is about all of our volleyball players in the Wood River Valley. This is all about our swimmers. This is all about, all the sport, baseball, everything that has continued on. And while I was saying that our football players weren't wearing masks, they weren't this summer when school wasn't in session, and they were playing all summer long. And there were still COVID cases out there, but they weren't playing as a school organized sport. They were out in the park playing together. And so I really, truly think it's something that we need to consider, as well as all of the time and effort spent from these coaches, the doctors, the AD directors that have been working together to ensure this. I do agree that it's okay that we have consequences if there is in fact a student that's, that ends up at a party and, a Snapchat is sent to an AD or a principal or whatever. Okay, they don't get to play. But I think that by them not giving them the chance because we're not sure what it might look like is not fair.
Trustee Turner?
I have a really hard time in that we are in red. I wake up in the middle of the night and say, oh my gosh, we're never gonna get these schools open. Because there's a spread in our community. And the virus bats last. It doesn't care about what we think about our protocols. It's gonna spread, and we can do things to slow it down. We can try to do things to slow it down, or we can just let it go. I'm not really prepared to let it go, but I'm an unelected board trustee, so who should listen to me? We put I think a lot of people put a lot into these protocols, and we're in a place now where, we should be shutting businesses down. That means people are going to start losing jobs again. And that's a bad thing. I certainly appreciate what football means and sports means to all these kids. And I want to find a solution so that they can play. I kind of agree with where the chairman was going, and also Trustee Larna, that maybe we need to look at each of these different sports separately. I think there's, swimming's a lot different than volleyball, and it's different than soccer, and certainly football. I certainly appreciate the coach's comments about, what do we have the right to control? Do we have the right to control family that wants to go down and watch their kids play ball? I don't think we do. We can control what we can control, and I think we have an obligation to control as much of that as possible. Again, this virus is in control. It's not us, and we need to do what we can do to keep our teachers safe. We know that the Kaiser Foundation came out and said 25% of the nation's teachers are in high risk categories. I've confirmed with our personnel people. We probably model that same kind of number. These are people, I think, that we are putting in additional risks in their lives by operating in playing sports when we are in a red protocol. I mean, if we're talking about if we're in yellow and going in to play at places orange, I think is a whole different discussion. But if we're in red, I mean, I thought red would shut everything down. And in these practice, it means we got to start talking about going to Plan C, which I believe, with all the inequity that's in Plan C, is a tragedy for so many people in our district. So it troubles me. Anything that takes us towards a Plan C teaching model, whether we're allowing additional vectors for virus into our schools by allowing certain protocols, I have a hard time with that. But again, I think, can we unpack this a bit? Can we say that let's figure out what the right protocol for volleyball is. Let's figure out what the right protocol is for each of the sports, and then be as flexible as possible. But the general context is that I'm feeling kind of helpless with this virus getting out of control in our community. And I hate to say it, it's because of choices people have taken. They've decided it's okay to not take precautions. They've decided it's all right to get together. But as a trustee whose primary obligation is to the safety of our kids and our staff, I have to take a much more conservative role. I don't go down to Twin. I got a 93-year-old mother I can't go see. I've got grandkids that I can't go see, but those are choices I've had to make. And I wish that everyone would do their best to keep this thing under control, because it's not going away if we just ignore it. We need to stand tall. It's like we're on a long trip, and the car's running out of gas because we got tired of it. Got tired of doing what we had to do. So that's my opinion. I'd like a lot more flexibility in dealing with each sport, but red, I take that very seriously. I mean, that's the time when we're not supposed to be getting together. We're supposed to be shutting down. We're supposed to be staying inside, and we're supposed to be taking additional steps to get this virus back under control.
Thank you. Trustee Stone?
Yeah, thank you. We've had some discussion about different metrics and how we're measuring this. How do we consider, are we in red now or are we not? And from the dashboard that's posted on the South Central Public Health District, now that they have agreed to and worked with our local people to come up with, the members on the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare site, the Global Health Initiative, the CDC recommendations, and the COVID Act Now, and all of them are very consistent right now. This is no longer a question of what metrics are we using. The metrics, unfortunately, have progressed to the point where they're really clear across the board that we are in a more serious situation. And I was actually really excited about what Kevin had put together earlier this week, and I was feeling very optimistic that this was a route that we could take. But unfortunately, the virus is spreading, and it's having a huge impact on our schools already. We have a bunch of people out. It's my understanding that there are very few live streaming classes if someone's at home in quarantine. I think that's unfortunate, but it means that Those who are in quarantine, isolation is actually when you have symptoms, and quarantine is if you've just been exposed. If you're in quarantine and, teachers aren't posting, most teachers are not posting lessons online right now. So for our athletes who have 5 more days of remote learning or 5 fewer days of in-person learning, I mean, that 5 days adds up to 2.5 more weeks where there's no in-person contact with the teacher, because that's 2 days a week, right? So it's 2.5 weeks that they don't have any contact in person with a teacher. And I feel like we've had a lot of really difficult conversations in board meetings here about whether Plan B, where they're only there 2 days a week, whether we're failing our students, whether our decision as a board to only have kids in school 2 days a week is failing our students, because it's important to have them there full time. We had lots and lots and hundreds of emails from people really, really pushing to have our kids in school full time. And we have stated repeatedly as a board that our primary goal is to get our students in school full time. And this is not a step in that direction. This is a step that increases risk. Clearly, we just had a football player that got, that tested positive, and we will see what the repercussions of that are. Hopefully it's just one person, but we don't know. But even if nobody else gets sick from it, one more positive test means that everyone, all those schools that are impacted, all those families are impacted. Now their kids are home for 14 days. All those teachers are impacted. Now they're trying, how are they going to teach their in-person learning to those students who are at home? There's been a lot of argument that the at-home days are not as productive, and that it's essential that the kids are in person to get those virtual lessons. So I just don't, and I say that, I want to acknowledge that my daughter was an athlete who went to state. I was an athlete who went to state. I know how big a deal it is. I know how important that is. I'm not from Cary, and I recognize that's just a whole city cultural thing as well that I think is super important, and I value that. These are horrible decisions to have to make. They're decisions that make it hard to sleep at night. They have nothing to do with, from my perspective, nothing to do with not valuing the importance of the work that kids are doing as athletes. It has everything to do with the really unfortunate circumstance of being in a global pandemic that is changing what things look like. And even though people have worked really hard, nonetheless, we're still in this situation. And given what we know about the virus and the risks to our staff and the impact even just of additional quarantines on our staff, even if nobody else gets sick, but to protect people, the quarantines that we have, that alone with our lack of subs and our, already the exposures that we have are already adding to the stress of our staff. And I just can't see increasing that risk.
Trustee Larner.
I just want to add one more thing kind of to this, and I appreciate Trustee Stone and Trustee Turner's thoughts on this. But I think it's really important. One of the things I struggle with is if Ketchum or whatever, we had a large number of people come in, and there's a huge outbreak in our community, and we're in red. And so many of these students who have done everything that they're supposed to do and not gone, anywhere that they were supposed to go and adhere to all of the standards, but our community is in red, and that prevents them from going to school, from practicing, from, all the things that it's doing. And I do think one more thing that we really need to consider as we move through this proposal is, again, and whether it's in our schools or not, whatever school it is, I truly think that that's something that we need to consider, because while I know we have control in the schools, we don't have control out of the schools in regards to our community. And that's in fact, what makes us, in red. I also think that we really need to consider the teachers that are in our school system that live in Twin and outside areas, as well as our teachers that, our teachers are incredible and they're working so incredibly hard right now. And I've talked to so many of them that, as you guys have discussed, the anxiety that goes with Plan B. But also we need to consider the ones that are also living their lives, like in going to Twin and going groceries. We're not, everyone right now we're not in shutdown like we were when this all began. We are leaving our homes, and whether some of us have to go get groceries or not, some of us are going on hikes or not. So it's important that we're in red right now. I get that. And maybe we won't be in red when it's this, then, maybe nobody has to quarantine because we're all in the green. So we don't know what that's going to look like. And right now it feels really heavy to all of us, I think. And because we're in red right now at this moment, but I do think that we really need to consider our kids, and education absolutely should be number one. And they're not even in school right now. And so I know that that's like a huge point for all of us, that they're not in school full time. But it's also not fair to take away and say, absolutely not right now at this moment, because we're in the red, when we can maybe navigate this a little bit differently as it gets closer and per sport. I do think that that's something that we need to consider. And, whether we're in the orange and the team we're going to be playing, maybe they're in the green. Like, we don't know what that looks like. As well as like Harvard at this point, they're 2 days lacking, and so I think a hard and fast no is not fair to our students. That's all I have.
I think there may be too much emphasis placed upon this issue of metrics. Those are important, but they're important for the information that they give us. They aren't necessarily important for how we use that information in determining what we want to do or what we should do with our schools or our athletic teams. I know a lot of people in writing their comments, and thank you all for those. I know all of us read them word for word. I try to respond to most of them. And there's a lot of commentary about how inappropriate or unfair it is for us to be using the Harvard Global Health Initiative rather than the South Central Public Health District metrics. In the end, although we might be in the red under one set and in the orange under another, that's less important to me than what I think the numbers really mean. And what is of concern to me right now is not what color happens to apply, but the fact that for some reason we have gone from a very flat curve to one that is, for whatever reason, spiking. And so to be loosening a policy in the midst of what appears to be an increasing infection rate, that's a tough call to make, a very tough call to make. And on the one hand, I fully understand how important it is to the student athletes and to their parents. And I'm my heart goes out to Carrie through all of this because, and I mean no disrespect, I think it's a wonderful thing. That whole community is focused in on the school, and athletics are a big part of that school, big part of that community. So any decision that curtails athletic competition in Cary is going to be very, very heavily felt, not just among the athletes or their parents, but everyone, virtually everyone in that community. Now, that's not to say that parents in the Wood River Valley whose student athletes play volleyball or swim or play soccer, that they aren't important. They are, no question about that. And if anybody thinks that any decision we make is going to please all of the people, I don't know where you've been for the last 6 months, because that certainly is not going to be the case. So for me, when we talk about, well, there are people going to Twin Falls and there are people from Twin Falls coming up here, and I think Coach Kirkland put it very, very well. We can't control every aspect of everybody's lives. There's no question about the fact that I guess 2 of the 5 cases now that have been confirmed among our students and staff were teachers, and no names involved here, but who engaged in obviously some activity that exposed them, and then they brought that exposure with them in the way of infection back to the schools. But we can't stop that. There just isn't any way we can do it. What we can do is our part in a community-wide effort to mitigate and eventually, we hope, suppress the virus. And that means that we can determine who's going to come onto our grounds, under what circumstances, who's going to enter our school buildings, what they're going to have to observe by way of regulation when they're in there. And another facet of that is what athletic competition our teams participate in. And one thing that makes this a bit different, I understand very much what Trustee Larna is saying, and she has been a very effective and tireless advocate for particularly the Cary community, but other parts of this district as well. But when I look at this, there's a difference between how we run the schools, where we're in control as much as anyone can be in control, and what happens when our athletes travel to another area where we are not in control, and we don't really know how serious some of those communities are in their observation of just common sense measures like social distancing and masking, things of that sort. So we're not going to control those things. We can't control people's lives once they're off our grounds. Fine, I understand that. And as Dr. Holmes pointed out at our last meeting, she goes to the school and everybody is wearing masks and doing exactly what they should be doing. And 2 hours later, she sees a huge group of kids at Starbucks sitting right next to each other, no masks, talking as only teenagers can talk. And that's true. There's no 2 ways about that. But we have a role to play. The parents have a role to play. The students themselves have a role to play. And if we don't have the entire community pulling together at the same time, I don't know when we're going to get the schools open on a full-time basis. Just a month ago, I was convinced that we were ready, even under the tight metrics of the Harvard global system, that we were right on the verge of being able to open up all of our schools, except perhaps the high school, on a full-time basis. And that we certainly were going to be able to return to full athletic schedules in all of the sports. And then 4 weeks later, here we are with numbers that we have not seen since clear last April. And that's troubling. It means that somebody somewhere has let down his guard or her guard, or we all have. And all of us are suffering from COVID fatigue. There isn't any question about that. It's really hard on everybody, and it's particularly hard on our young people. And it's easy to throw up your arms, or as a lot of people have done, decide that, well, isn't all that big a deal? Come on, this is no worse than the common cold or flu. Let's get back to normal. And how you get back to normal is not a simple thing. So that's what really concerns me. It's not looking at the Harvard metrics and we're red there, but if we were under the South Central metrics, we'd be orange. What I'm really concerned with is that the numbers have increased dramatically in a very short period of time. Add to that the experience we had with the Wood River High School football team. And I just think we have to be incredibly vigilant here. The problem in all of this is if you enforce something against, if you will, and I don't mean that in an aggressive sense, the volleyball team, and they aren't able to play because they happen to have their tournament during a time when numbers are high, and yet Carey's football team can turn around 4 weeks later, and because the situation has improved markedly, they are permitted to go into state competition. To a lot of people, that's going to seem unfair. You want a one-size-fits-all system until it doesn't fit you as well as you would like it to, and then you want to start going case by case, sport by sport, game by game. There are advantages to having a policy that is one-size-fits-all, but there are also disadvantages. So I don't rule anything out. I still want to see the schools get fully opened. I want to see us get back into full-time athletic competition. I think it can be done, but it can't be done if people just ignore that it's out there and decide, I don't have to wear that mask. Don't tell me what I can do when I go in the grocery store. If we don't have a community-wide effort, then things aren't going to get better. They're going to get worse. So that's my long-winded series of comments. Go ahead, Trustee Larna. Looks like you have additional comments.
No, I didn't.
Trustee Stone.
I don't have anything additional.
I have a couple comments. I'm not sure I'm allowed to comment when it's discussion or not.
Pardon me, I didn't catch that, Mr. Stone.
I didn't know if I was allowed to make a comment or not, just in closing or not, Mr. Rourke.
I'm always interested in your comments and those of Coach Kirkland, but you guys are coaches. You know how important the rules are, and we got a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. It's under discussion, and that would be outside the rules. So forgive me if I cut you off there. All right. If there are no, go ahead, Trustee Turner.
Yeah, I would just like to say, while I probably can't support the protocols that we're looking at today, I don't want to close the door on this, because it's too important on a lot of aspects. And again, it may take some fine tuning, but to take into consideration different circumstances and hopefully all these numbers in our community change and things we can make allowances and so forth. But again, take to heart many of your comments, Chairman Rourke, about loosening protocols when the numbers are running smack in our face the wrong direction. So thank you.
Any other comments? All right, hearing no further discussion, then I will call the question. The motion before you is to approve the proposed district and state athletic competition protocol. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it. Consequently, the motion does not carry. Again, I want Athletic Director Stilling and Coach Kirkland and all of the other coaches and athletes out there. This is a decision that's been made based upon the numbers that exist today. If things improve, as we hope they will improve, then it sounds to me like the board is completely open to reconsidering. Having said that, there is no further business before the board, and therefore I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All of those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the ayes have it. The motion carries. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you for being available. Coach Kirkland, thank you. Athletic Director Stilling. Dr. Batch is no longer with us, but thank you as well. I know a lot of people who put a lot of effort into this, and I know there are a lot of passionate feelings out there. We're doing what we can, folks, and I wish it was an easy job. It's not. We're adjourned, and we will talk to you all later. Thank you.
Bye.